Welcome, everyone, to our Friday night feature session, The Intersection of Prairie, History, and Poetry. This evening, we'll be taking in the poetry of Athena Kildegaard, as well as hear about her process of writing. Athena is the author of 6 books of poetry, most recently Prairie Midden, which won the 2023 Willa Literary Award for Poetry. She's also an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Morris. She's a land steward herself, living on an oak savanna in west central Minnesota, and she and her partner are restoring a wetland as well. I'm also grateful to Athena, who chose our winning haiku this year, and she'll be announcing that winner shortly. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you all to Athena Kildegaard.
Mhm. Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And hello to everybody out there in Zoom land on this beautiful February 14th. Maybe where you are, it's snowing right now. We've been traveling through a snowstorm this afternoon. Nice time to be in a car with your sweetheart on a Valentine's Day. So I thought I would start by awarding the haiku winner before I go into my talk. But before I do that, do want to thank Sarah and Cassidy for making this happen. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with. So thank you, Sarah and Cassidy. So the winning haiku comes to us from Sarah Bull, and here's how it goes. Flames crackle dry grass. Crew herds fire over prairie, burning to bring life. So I realized today, congratulations, Sarah. I realized today that I'm speaking to the choir a little bit here and talking to you about my book of poetry about the prairie. Um, so anyway, I hope I don't say too many things that you already know. I am going to be reading to you and talking to you about my book Prairie Midden that Sarah just mentioned. Unfortunately, my publisher is not able right now to sell it. So if you find that you want a copy of it, all you have to do is email me. This is the shameless promotion part of the talk. Just email me. Here's my email, and we can work out the details. And I'll give everybody who's at this conference a special deal if you want a copy of my book. And the other thing is, we're cutting tonight's talk a little bit short because of some personal things for me. So if you find that you have a question you are really keen to ask me, please do send me an email, and I'll be happy to respond. This project, in a way, started because I live out on the prairie, or have been living out on the prairie in western Minnesota. I grew up in St. Peter, Minnesota, which is in the Minnesota River Valley, and just north and south of St. Peter is Prairie. You get up above the river, up the bluff above the river, and you're out on the prairie. So I grew up loving it and returned to the prairie in 2001 and wanted to write about it. So let me begin by reading you the very first poem in the book. It is called Invocation. And what shall we do when there is no prairie? Where shall we step without mourning? Where shall we call in the manner of coyote, in the manner of prairie chicken? Where shall we sing? And how shall we know sunset as the blossoming of bee balm, wind as the direction of prairie smoke, snow as the fulfillment of hunger? And what shall we do through the long afternoons, those summer swelters when no grass can shelter us? So you can hear in that poem another of my concerns, and I know it's yours too, and that is the loss of the prairie. So I'm right now in Des Moines, Iowa. The state of Iowa has less than 1/10 of prairie remaining. The state of Minnesota has just under 1% of prairie remaining. We've done pretty much everything we can to make the prairie disappear, as I know you all know. Um, so I also have been a huge fan of this man, Paul Grucco, who grew up on a farm outside Montevideo, Minnesota, which is in western Minnesota. And he wrote an absolutely gorgeous book, which, if you have never read it, I strongly recommend it. It's called Journal of a Prairie Year. And Gruco was writing this in the 60s and 70s, and he's remembering his childhood and time he spent outdoors exploring the world. And it's also an elegy. The book is a kind of elegy for the prairie. So it's an ode to the prairie and an elegy for the prairie. And I've been highly influenced by his writing, and wanted, as I think many writers do, to add my own voice to the conversation. So I was very lucky to receive a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, which allowed me to come here to the Minnesota History Center in St. Paul, where there is a really fantastic research library, the Gale Research Library. So I was able to spend a few weeks here digging around in the archives. The reason I went there in the first place is because I had this idea that I would come across letters, journals, notebooks by women at different times from the early settlement of the prairie up to the present, in which they were writing about the outdoors, about the prairie. And what I discovered was that women really did not do that. They did a lot of other things. Many women did write letters, of course, and kept notebooks or diaries. But a lot of those entries had to do with the weather, or they had to do with the chores that had been accomplished that day, or who had been visiting, or who they had visited. And there was not this kind of reflection on the outdoors and what was happening to the prairie. So I had to kind of change my project because I was really hoping to tap some of that stuff and repurpose it in my own poetry, and that did not happen. And then about that time, I read an amazing book called The Worst Hard Time by a guy named Timothy Egan, in which he is thinking about the Great Depression and about the Dust Bowl. And I fell in love with that book, and it sparked this poem, which eventually became called Prairie Daughter, and the year of this poem is 1936. We ate tumbleweed in brine after the government men shot the cow. Dust pushed the fences under. Whole days went by with no light. We learned to sit with our eyes closed, to breathe through sponges when we had them, otherwise pillowcases, folded and wet. I could trace dreams in the dust, daisies or apples or sidecars. Not for girls, Mama said. Anyway, a sidecar wouldn't be fast enough. Snakes twisted belly up on the barbed wire. I used to stand by the front door and count how many steps to any grove of trees, any hill, any river you could escape on. Now I'd settle for calm. I want to tear those dust black sheets down. So this poem is imagining a girl of, let's say, 16 years old, feeling as many of us did at that age, like we really want to get away and find a new life somewhere else. And also in this case, it's set at the time of the Dust Bowl, when these incredible dust storms would come in and make a mess of their lives. And this poem became the model for a sequence of poems that carries through this book. And these are all poems that are titled Prairie Daughter. The first one is dated 1832, which is about the time of early settlement in western Minnesota, and the last one is dated 2036, slightly into the future. And so the time I was spending in the Gale Library, the research library, I was reading about the lives of these incredible people. Um, so let me read you another poem. This poem is called Dear Prairie Daughters. So I realized at a certain point in working on this book that what I also wanted more than anything was to talk directly to these young women over time, which of course is not possible, but is in your imagination. So there's another sequence of poems through the book that are called Dear Prairie Daughters, and this is one of those. I wanted your words about the prairie, wanted your presence in the tall grass, but got only below freezing or rain, baked 3 oatmeal cakes, laundry, nothing about blue stem, barred owl, cottonwood. Cataloged boxes brought up from the temp-controlled lower levels gave me government files and yearbooks and Pillsbury's tips for homemakers. I had to raise your ghost, bring you into the absence of prairie, into tar and concrete and acre upon acre of corn and beans, blade straight, insect free and mammal free, free of anything that offers itself to wind's desires. There was prairie, and then there was not. Did you see? Now we say Prairie Realty, Prairie Movers, Prairie Insurance. We name the world hauntingly, and you are gone from it. I am calling you to tell your story, molecular, ancestral, desperate, the bruised story echoed by scripture, by monologue, by caterwaul. A story buried. Speak of it. Haunt me into it. So just trying to kind of imagine, uh, um, asking these long gone people to come and talk to me. So I one of the things I had fun doing is repurposing text that I found. So here's an example of a piece that I found in a box that a librarian brought up for me from the catacombs of the library. These are just a few of the items in this list of rules for etiquette for girls, how to behave. Let's see. I think I want to read to you page 23. No, that's not it. Sorry. Um, well, we'll find it. I'm very sorry. All right, so I'm going to read to you a Prairie Daughter poem that I did not have to do research about, and you will recognize some of what's in this one. This is a Prairie Daughter poem that is dated 1862. I didn't hear Papa arrive in the night. Where he'd been, he didn't tell, but apologized for the state of his clothes. Then he and Mama went out to get eggs and talk, and I thought to follow, to eavesdrop, but something kept me back. High sun for wash day, the blackbirds with red patches chattering overhead, just like the Smalls when they get up in a tree. The Smalls are the imagined siblings, younger siblings. How do you get blood out of clothes? I asked Mama back when my monthlies came. Afterwards, my hands red and raw from the lie, Papa's clothes on the line, and all the rest, too. I lay down under the cottonwood, old Deuteronomy, Mama called it. I had no prayer, no wish, only an ugliness inside me and a fear and something else, not homesickness, for I was at home, but an itchy longing for somewhere else. Don't go off where you can't see the house, Papa said, and said again. Don't wander. There's no telling, though he doesn't name it. Fee, fi, fo, fum, the smell of blood, the stiff places in his sleeves and on the knees, as if he'd knelt in another's spilling. Perhaps he did. My knuckles hurt. Someday, when I'm picked clean, someone will throw them to know the future. It will be an emptiness and a fright. So that's a poem that's trying to capture what it might have been like to be a young person during the war between the federal government and the Sioux people. Yeah, so she doesn't quite know what's going on, but she knows that it's terrible. All right, so I'm going to read you a poem that I built using this etiquette list that's in front of you. So this one is dated 1905. And in this poem, the daughter, the prairie daughter, and her mother ride a sleigh across the lake to go visiting. So this is Prairie Daughter, 1905. Papa hitched Pansy to the stone boat, and Mama and I crossed the lake to call on Miss D, horrid Miss D, we called her for how she made us memorize Longfellow and the Gettysburg, made us take turns reciting, and the boys took turns sneaking out to the privy to smoke as fast as they could, she never knowing a thing, or pretending anyhow. All the way, the blue blade of the sled whined on the ice, and Mama instructed me on what to do as if I knew nothing. Don't refer to the weather, don't pick your teeth or fidget with your hat. Keep your legs together when you sit. Miss D sat straight as Lucifer and opened her mouth like she did. Her lips were not meant to part. Nor her thighs neither, so the older boys said. Above all, keep your knees together. Yes, Mama. Yes, Mama. So that's that poem. So here's an image of something maybe I bet you've all heard about but maybe have never seen. This is not actually the one I saw. Unfortunately, I didn't take a picture of the one I saw, but it's a dance card. And you can see that it's been printed, and then the person who wants to dance, the young woman carries the dance card, and the young man who wants to dance with her puts his name in the slot the dance that he wants to dance. And you can see at the bottom on the left-hand side, it says supper. So they would dance for half of the evening, and then everybody would go maybe into another room or at the end of the hallway, and there would be sandwiches and lemonade. And if you were a young man and you were hot on a girl, you would try to get the dance before supper, because that meant you could escort her to the meal and sit beside her during the entirety of the meal. So this poem is based on that. It is dated 1910. Mama said she wouldn't let me dance with Jim. He was coarse and didn't clean his boots. But I did the moonlight waltz, though Al, the dear, took first and last and led me off to sandwiches. Didn't the girls laugh at that at school? Al is hardly jolly and talkative, as they predict my future beau will be. He cleans his boots, but he does hesitate, not like Jim. After coffee, we stuffed hay around our legs and rode home in the sleigh, Papa driving, the horsewhip silent at his side, and all the stars whirling in a toot your horn two-step. At home, a cow was baying in the barn, and I helped Papa with the early calf. Sometime in the night, coyotes carried off the carcass. Snow fell, and the cow lowed a mournful waltz. So that's that poem. So I want to show you um this. Let's see, I'm gonna skip that. Um oh, sorry. We need to be here. So the Department of Agriculture early in the century, the last century, sent letters to farm wives all over the country asking for them to write back about their lives and what their needs were. And a lot of women indeed did write back. Many of them did not have their own notebook paper or paper to write letters on. So what they did was they just wrote in the margins of the letter that came from the Department of Agriculture and sent the letter back with their notes. So I'm going to read two poems based on that, the reading that I did of those letters. The first one is these are what are called found poems. So these are just words I lifted directly from the women's letters. The first one is called Domestic Needs of Farm Wives, a found poem. 1. Lots of windows and full-length mirrors so we may see ourselves as others see us. So we may straighten up and fix up so the men might see the mud on their boots and their unshaved chins. 2. Because we need the birds to eat bugs and worms that destroy the crops on farms, the use of birds on hats should be prohibited. 3. Study the little things, the housefly, mosquitoes, gnats, moths, and other nuisances, and rats and mice too. What a blessing it would be to get rid of all such vermin. And the next one is called Teach the Men, and this too is a found poem. Teach the men we need the new improvements. So many of us are cooking on the same old stoves, still run our clothes on the washboard. The men have bought automobiles, mowers, rakes, hay racks, and new patent stackers, sulky plows and harrows, cultivators and wagons. Whenever they see something that will lighten their labors, lo, give the women ranges, kitchen cabinets, linoleum covered or hardwood floors, sanitary walls and wall coverings, washing machines, iron bedsteads, good water. So you could see kind of reflected in that the way in which the men acquired what they needed in order to bust sod and plant wheat or whatever it was that they were planting. So here is the title page of maybe the most popular home health guide for women. And you can see at the top of there, this 1883 edition was the 210th edition of this book. I just love this title page. So here's another found poem riffing on this book. There are many ways the rural home keeper could be helped. A found poem. A real good doctor book written by an intelligent mother in everyday language, which can tell you how and why and when to give a good dose of castor oil or a thorough application of peroxide or vanilla or Vaseline, Jamaica ginger, cornstarch, or red pepper or anti-phlogiston. Also, how to use chloride of lime, formaldehyde, and whitewash. Just give one a good common understanding of simple remedies and preventatives. So this is a kind of a complaint about this book written by Mr. Gunn, who takes kind of a condescending attitude towards the women who use his book, and they just wanted something written by a somebody like them to speak to them in plain language. I think that's quite beautiful. So here's a form I came across during the Dust Bowl and the drought era. People had to go into town to the usually to the county courthouse and make a declaration about what their losses were. And I found the forms from the county that I was living in at that time, Stevens County in western Minnesota. And a kind of remarkable thing about these forms is that though most of them were written by men, there were a handful of women who went into town and filled out this form. And part of what you can see that part of what they're filling in is what their losses are in terms of what's been planted. And then you can see they have to provide some information about the state of their finances. And then they include information about the animals that they have on the farm. And at the very bottom, which we can't see in this, is information about who lives on the farm. And the person who's making the declaration puts in their age. So many of these women were in their 40s and 50s. They were the breadwinner on the farm. They were widows, but they were also living not only with children and grandchildren, but they might have a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle. There would be other people living on the farm. So I thought this was utterly fascinating, and wrote a poem using the some of the information that I got from this. So the poem is called To Apply to the State for Drought Relief, 1933. Go to town, courthouse of red brick, all the windows open. You must represent yourself. All the truth will be told. Of wheat, 95% lost. Of corn, everything crisped to oblivion. Of oats, not enough to get to Christmas. 9 at home, and the chickens hide in the corners. Go to town. No car, so you walk. Save the horse. For what? In case. Yes, you say you have a farm for next year. There's that. But what is a farm? No corn this year, only 35 bushels of wheat. The children hold the lamb by its tail, the shoat by its ear. Go to town. Already behind on the mortgage, who will buy the hogs? Let them loose in the riverbed. Not a cob of corn survived July, too dry even to weep. Hay for silage, what there is. Chickens, happy as angels. Go to town. Represent that drought has destroyed your crops. How does a number make sense? Represent that the acres stand empty, that dust springs from prayer, the North Star fades like asters in the heat. Almost 60 and you sleep alone, dream of your mother standing in grass. Go to town. Chickens tied with twine. They stop flapping by the city line. Chickens for lamp oil. What is a farm but a dream? What was replaced by what could be? You remember breaking sod. You'll not go back there. So, um, I saw a beautiful map of Morris, and of the early part of the 20th century, and there were cigar rollers. A couple businesses, second floor businesses of cigar rollers, and there were quite a few more bars in Morris than there are today. So some of that stuff I had found out researching a different project, and it slipped into this poem, a Prairie Daughter poem, which is set in 1953, the year that the first mall in Minnesota opened. Papa promised we'd ride the train to Minneapolis, the Smalls, me, Mama, all of us, to spend a night with Aunt and Uncle. They have a television. We'd go to the first indoor mall, but what's an outdoor mall? Our downtown with its row of baker, butcher, cigar roller, grocer, and between each a den of iniquity, as Mama said. 72 stores under one roof, and not one a druggist, not one a butcher. Papa read it and promised, so big we could lose one another, so big we'd forget we were human. Then a blizzard from Saskatchewan banked snow to the sills. It's always nature as changes our plans, Papa said. With my 4 quarters, what would I have bought, and in which store? Mama fried chicken anyway, and we pretended the kitchen was a train car. How far will we go? Papa asked. How far? All the way around until we're here again. The next day we saw the marks of coyotes in the snow. They called all night, calls quick as icicles. So that's I'm just going to end with a kind of sort of a benediction, and it's called Dear Prairie Daughters. To lie down on prairie is to feel sky as beam or birth and upholding, a truss. And to lie down on little blue stem, on lead plant, on pasque flower blooming, is to lie with your back against entrance, is to feel air as a song, to feel yourself between prairie and sky, and that is to dream. Oh, thank you so much. I hope you have some questions for me.
Athena, this was an absolute joy. I mean, what a way to spend a Friday evening. Thank you
Oh,
so
thank you,
much.
Sarah.
Um, it's been fascinating to see behind the curtain and the types of historical documents that are informing your writing process. So thank you for sharing that as well. It's really
You bet.
interesting. We have a comment from one of our attendees saying that your line in an earlier poem, "We name the world hauntingly," was a particularly powerful line for Jessica Bizzop, who went to a school named Prairie View Elementary, but at her time, there was no Prairie there.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um, oh, go ahead.
and so I mean, how strange to be a child growing up knowing that there could be prairie, or that there was prairie, and to not necessarily get to have any sense of what prairie is like. Yeah.
Yeah, she's also curious. Jessica seems to be a fan, so thank you again for sharing. I know you had mentioned that Prairie Midden we'd have to reach out to you for, but is there other ways that we can find your material? Are you somewhere that we can get your beautiful poetry?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Sarah. My publisher is a small publisher, and um we had a terrible thing happen in the indie press world last year. The distributor that many of the small independent presses relied on closed its doors overnight. I mean, they were going one day and they shut their doors, leaving everybody high and dry, and it's been a terrible scramble for small presses, and mine, Tinderbox Editions, hasn't quite gotten on its feet yet. So I'm pretty sure I myself don't like to shop at Amazon, but I'm pretty sure they have some. So after that, I'm not really sure where to find them. I wish it weren't like this.
Well, I know you're sharing your email here, but our moderator can maybe put that in the chat as well, so people have that as an easy reference to get in contact with you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely. A question. I'm wondering what initially inspired you to focus on women at this particular time and relationship with the prairie.
Yeah, I mean, well, a few things. I mean, one is, as you mentioned in your introduction, I teach at the University of Minnesota Morris, and one of the courses that I teach is called the Environmental Imagination, and we read a lot of nature writing, and men have dominated nature writing, until the middle of the 20th century, and since then we've seen I mean, it's not. I'm kind I'm this is I'm not exaggerating really. I mean, men really have dominated nature writing. It's not that there weren't women, there haven't been women in the past writing about the natural world. Of course there have been. So that was one thing, just the feminist in me, wants to write about that. But the other part of it is I feel like I'm an onlooker to something that happened that I didn't have any control over, you know? I mean, the loss of the prairie, it's still happening. You guys all know this. I mean, I drive around western Minnesota, and people are taking down stands of trees along creeks and then putting down tile, and this, and draining wetlands, because I'm out in prairie pothole country, so people drain the wetlands, and then convert it into soybeans or corn. So it's still happening, and there's it's I'm just an observer, you know? And so I wanted to write about these women's lives, and kind of interrogate them, like, why weren't you seeing what was going on? And how can you, when in order to do laundry in the year 1910, let's say, you don't have electricity. It takes all day. That's all you do. You have to haul water. You have to heat enormous vats, and wring out the clothes and the sheets and whatever, and hang them on lines, and then bring them in, and then I mean, it was just like a huge long process, and you had to do this in the middle of winter, right? Which is like mind blowing to think about women out on the prairie hanging laundry on a February date like today or like Monday. And a lot of these women, they had one day of the week set aside for laundry. They always did laundry on Tuesday, which meant it didn't matter what the weather was doing. You still had to get your laundry done. I mean, you might postpone it till tomorrow, but just the sort of sheer labor that people were doing. I think the world goes on whether it goes on without us in a lot of ways, and I guess that's part of the discovery I kind of made for myself in writing this book. So yeah,
Very
great
interesting. Yeah,
question. Thanks, Jessica.
I love the line that you had early on too that said, I had to bring you into an absence of prairie. That's just
Yeah.
so powerful to phrase it that way. And I want to give you a reflection from Debbie Bocher. The history represented is so insightful, and what it's like to be a woman has not really changed so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a question from Gianna. I'm sorry, I'm going to probably say your last name wrong. Katuria, and wondering what some of your favorite natural areas are around Morris.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, for one thing, east of Morris, we have a beautiful a wetland with prairie, and they've done a lot of really nice work restoring the prairie. And the wetlands are quite beautiful out there. I spend a lot of time out there. And then near south of Starbuck is Glacial Lake State Park, which is okay, glacial lake, but it's also same. There's some native prairie and there's some restored prairie. There were some farms that the state was able to purchase and convert land back, or restore prairie, I should say. So those are two, and it's incredible because you can go out there. You all know this, but just to step off the path and walk out into the grass, whatever the time of the year is, even in the winter, and tromp around is just heavenly. It really is. Yeah, so those are two.
Nice. You're speaking to the choir and hopefully
I know I
inspiring some
am.
people to check out some areas they haven't been to yet.
Mm.
So Greg Heberlein put in the chat that one of your books is at the St. Paul Public Library. So there you go. That's exciting. And he also has a question for you and wondering which poets have had the strongest influence on you.
Oh, wow. I love that question. Well, so many, it's sort of impossible to name them all, but I grew up, as I said, in St. Peter, and my dad taught in the English department at Gustavus. And we had a lot of Minnesota writers come through our house. And in fact, one of a dear friend of our family, was a writer named Bill Holm. Bill was an essayist and a poet, and he wrote a lot about the prairie and about Western Minnesota. He grew up in Minneota. Both of his parents were Icelanders. And if you don't know his writing, I highly recommend him. So I was quite influenced by Bill and by his ideas about poetry. The first books of poetry that I purchased for myself were two kind of contrary poems. One, a little book called Honey and Salt by Carl Sandburg, the Chicago poet, and the other, the collected poems of Marianne Moore, the modernist poet who lived in Brooklyn and was a Dodgers fan a devoted Dodgers fan her whole life. And she was quite experimental, very a super intellectual poet, whereas Carl Sandburg was a poet of the people, writing much more in a tradition of the vernacular and of the rhythms of the people. So they were so opposite as poets, but they were the two of my first purchases. So
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
That's really great to know. I've got another question here, kind of a logistical one about how you can go about, like, what's your process about constructing a found poem and how do you select letters to use or other documents? Can you walk us through that process?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, mostly, this is gonna sort of silly and maybe a little glib, but I think a lot of people who write poetry do it among many reasons, but one, because we love words. And so that's part of it, is just the delicious words. Right? Um, but then, sometimes I've, like the poem that I read, Teach the Men, and what is it that the women want is good water. To read that, good water, all we want is good water. That just slayed me. I just, what, we're worried about a new sulky, a new harrow, and we don't even have decent water. It's like, what are our priorities? Well, I mean, of course, we know what they are. We understand them, but so sometimes it's just a revelation like that's so delicious. You have to turn it into a poem.
Mm, love that. Well, I'm going to give you one more question, I think, so that you've got enough time to get to your obligation. So
Thank you,
I'm
Sarah.
wondering, as you're, writing poems of different eras and into the future as well,
Mm.
what kind of thought do you have about the future people reading your poetry and in the world that they're going to live on? Can you just give us like a final reflection of what you see happening in the future?
Yeah. Well, so there are poems in here that I think are kind of hard to read as that are pile-ups of. There's a poem, if I can just find it, I can hold it up and you'll see what I'm talking about. Um, I don't know if you can see that or not. It just says row of corn, row of corn, row of corn, right? Um, that's my world. You know, you drive down the county roads and this is what you see, row of corn, row of corn, row of corn. That's a kind of a hard poem to read aloud. There's another poem that all it is names of flowers. It's a two-part poem, and then it just ends. So as you all know, there are lots of prairie plants that have the word prairie in them, and the poem ends with just a pile up of prairie, 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 like that. So that's I do sometimes read that poem, but I mean, partly I just want people to read it and realize, okay, there's indoor life, you know, there's the life of what's going on inside, and there's the political life, there's the, you know, the Sioux War, you know, the war there of 1862, you know, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War show up in these poems. All this stuff is going on, but at the same time, there are the things of the prairie. And there's another poem that's simply a list of um, creatures, and mostly creatures that are either extinct or endangered from the prairie. So, you know, just a reminder, it's not all about us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all connected. That's a great message to end on as it really loops back with our beginning presentation as well. So thank you so much, Athena. This
Thank
was
you, Sarah.
truly a wonderful, wonderful session. I know your
Thank you.
book will be making its way onto my shelf very soon, so I
Oh, good.
appreciate that.
I'm glad to hear it.
And for everybody else, just a logistical thing, we have our very last presentation, our keynote presenter will start at 8:50 tomorrow. So thank you so much and enjoy your evening, everyone.
Thank you.